Hello there, and welcome to today's Chambers webinar on structural reforms in Greece, a pathway to investments with POTAMITISVEKRIS. My name is Lawrence Musset, and I'm one of the research managers on the EMEA team at Chambers and Partners. I've recently taken over as research manager of our Greek coverage. I'm delighted today to be joined by three speakers from POTAMITISVEKRIS. They include George Bassis, co-managing partner, Alexios Papastavru, Employment and Social Security Partner, and Aspasia Malia, Tax Partner. This webinar will also contain a speech from Managing Partner Stathis Potamitis. Today's session will last around 45 minutes. If you would like to join the conversation, we are able to accept questions via the text box on your screen. You can access key resources for today's session by using the event resources box on your screen. Should you have any technical issues, please click the question mark button at the bottom of your screen, where you will find some helpful tips. And so now we'll move on to our first speaker. I'd like to hand over to George Bassis.
Dear friends and colleagues, my name is George Bassis. I'm a co-managing partner of POTAMITISVEKRIS, and it is with great pleasure that our firm hosts today's webinar in cooperation with Chambers and Partners on the Greek structural reforms. Since we conceived the idea of this webinar, there have been good and bad developments. On the positive side, POTAMITISVEKRIS won the Greece Law Firm of the Year award for 2021, the fourth time in the last 9 years and the second year in a row, and is again shortlisted for 2022. The good news regarding our firm were, however, overridden by the war in Ukraine. Only until a couple of weeks ago, no one of us could ever imagine that a war of such proportions would occur in European soil. We are all deeply shocked and worried that the armed conflict will push the world into uncharted waters and trigger broader ramifications for future cooperation on critical issues like nuclear non-proliferation, energy security, counter-terrorism, cybersecurity, and political solutions in Syria, Libya, and elsewhere. There is no question that in this new era, each and every one of us needs to become even more responsible on an individual level. We in POTAMITISVEKRIS want to support against the humanitarian crisis, have thus donated to NGOs working on the ground, and will continue to offer relief to the people who suffer in the best way we can. It is overall an alarming situation that forces Europe as a whole and each member state individually to rethink policies and strategies. It is also too soon to discuss how Europe or even Greece should better address the ramifications of the war in Ukraine, since the situation is very fluid. We have therefore decided to stick to our original program for this webinar and present you with some important structural reforms that Greece recently implemented and for which lawyers of POTAMITISVEKRIS are to receive credit, since they participated in the drafting of the relevant legal framework or contributed ideas and know-how. Assisting the Greek state in improving by becoming more rational, efficient, and competitive is a core value in POTAMITISVEKRIS' culture, and we welcome every opportunity offered to us. Before diving into the bankruptcy, tax, and labor reforms, I will try to explain very briefly where Greece is and what is its strategy going forward. In the end of 2009, Greece entered into the spiral of an unprecedented financial crisis. Even today, no one can be sure if the crisis has really ended. The basic reason is that this financial crisis was the product of deeply rooted structural deficiencies of the Greek economy, which needs time and struggle to ramify. Without going into too much of detail, we can separate the crisis in certain phases. In the first phase, I call it the denial phase, the Greek people did not want to accept the economic adjustment programs and their reforms. So between 2008 and 2014, we had an accumulated GDP decline of approximately 25%. The summer of 2015 marked the turning point when the Greek people realized that the best way forward was to remain with the EU and the Eurozone. The government changed its strategy and took ownership of structural reforms, which were of unprecedented scope and breadth. From 2017 onwards, GDP started growing with an accelerating pace. However, economic recovery came to a sudden stop due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sorry. The pandemic hit the economies of all European countries, but had a sharper economic impact on Greece because its economy is highly dependent on services with a high share of tourism and retail trade. As a result, the economy contracted by 8.2% in 2020. However, the impact was mitigated by the decrease in imports of goods and services. The government provided among the largest on-budget fiscal stimuli in the Eurozone, which prevented a spike in corporate distress and kept workers attached to the labor market, although young and part-time workers experienced a sharp drop in employment. Supervisory and ECB accommodations shielded the banking sector and kept financial conditions highly supportive. Thus, despite the heavy losses, the Greek economy showed resilience and ability for operational adjustment to the new situation. Just today, the preliminary GDP figures for 2021 were released and show a growth of approximately 8.1% for this year. So where did all this lead us? You can see here the Greek government debt chart as a percentage of and the GDP. As you can see, at the end of 2021, the Greek public debt amounted to a record of 388 billion, or approximately to 200% of GDP. When looking at absolute numbers, the debt is very high. However, it remains sustainable over the medium term for the following reasons. The favorable debt structure and its repayment profile, which limit refinancing risks. Most of our debt is to the official sector with very favorable interest rates. The government has a large cash buffer. It was 32 billion as of the end of 2020, which allows it to actively manage its liabilities and mitigate refinancing risks. ECB's pandemic emergency purchase program has been an important source of financing flexibility for Greece, since the Greek government bonds remain unqualified for other ECB purchase programs due to their sub-investment grade status. All in all, we have a huge government debt, viable in the medium term, but need the right strategy to make it viable in the long term. Greek economy needs to further transform towards a more extrovert, competitive, and green, sustainable economic model. At the same time, it is important that economic efficiency should be combined with social cohesion and justice. So what is the plan of the government and how does it try to address this problem? The Pisaridis committee, which was comprised by 4 distinguished academic economists, headed by Nobel laureate LSE economist Chris Pisaridis, presented in November 2020 its report. This report analyzes the main characteristics and trends of the Greek economy and lays out actions aimed at boosting incomes through improved productivity, extensive labor options, and more investments, as well as increased export activity and extroversion. The report focuses on policy reforms for a sustainable recovery of the Greek economy, and the government has used this report as the basis of its reform agenda. On the slide here, you can see the national strategies and national action plans compiled by the various governmental agencies based on the Pisaridis Committee report recommendations. The report forecasted an annual GDP growth of 3.5% on average by 2030, if its recommendations, of course, are followed. In addition to the reforms undertaken or to be undertaken, there is the National Strategic Reference Framework, which is basically subsidies, with approximately 27 billion of investments for the period of 21 to 27. And there are also some other European or national investment and subsidy programs. It is, however, the European funds in the context of Next Generation EU recovery instrument that are expected to make the big difference. The Next Generation EU Recovery Fund is the central pillar of EU's plan to boost economies after the coronavirus pandemic. Under this program, Greece will receive funds and loans at near zero interest rates and pass them on to the banks, ensuring cheap borrowing for Greek companies at rates similar to those of other Eurozone countries. The Greek Recovery and Resilience Plan, Greece 2.0, is the government's proposal for the new Next Generation EU funds, how to be deployed, and aspires to change the Greek growth model. The Recovery and Resilience Plan wants to go beyond economic recovery by introducing fundamental economic and social reforms. The key investments are in the following areas: green transition, digital transformation, employment skills, social cohesion, private investment, and transformation of the economy. Thus, the Greek Recovery and Resilience Plan is a now or never opportunity to transform the Greek economic model, solve our public debt problem, and set sound economic foundations for the future. Now, I will turn to my dear colleagues from POTAMITISVEKRIS, who will speak on some very significant structural reforms in the Greek legal framework. Stathis Potamitis will speak about the reform on the Bankruptcy Code. Unfortunately, Stathis could not attend, but he will be happy to take any questions by email. Aspa, who will present the reforms on tax, and Alexios on the very important reforms of the labor sector. Of course, we will be happy to answer any questions you may have, so please post them on the webinar's board or even send them to us via email. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stathis Potamitis. I'm a managing partner of POTAMITISVEKRIS, and for the next 10 minutes or so, I will speak very briefly on the structural reforms in Greece in the area of bankruptcy. I was honored to be the chair of a small expert committee that drafted the new law, and in my view, we have introduced a number of very significant reforms. To understand the reforms, you have to look to what was there before 2021, when the new law was introduced. We had a very small number of bankruptcies, less than 200 a year, and at the same time, a very large number of zombie entities which were effectively dead, inactive, but not properly dealt with through bankruptcy. We lacked a clear path to debt discharge, both because bankruptcy was used very infrequently, but also because there was no consumer bankruptcy. There was a proceeding known as the Katselis proceeding, but that failed to produce any substantial results. Overall, debtors lacked a clear legal way to resolve their indebtedness, or lacked an efficient way to resolve their indebtedness, while creditors lacked a credible threat because bankruptcy was not believed to be a way for them to secure a sufficient recovery. Much of the problem was due to excessive procedural complexity, and one may identify as elements of that the lack of significant creditor input, excessive involvement by the courts, a late start to liquidation and many opportunities for various parties to block it, as well as generally lack of expertise on the part of administrators, and I should add courts as well. There are a number of reforms, but I would like to focus on 4 of them. First of all, the speeding up of liquidation. Secondly, the strengthening of the role of creditors. Thirdly, the use of a digital registry for all announcements, communications, registrations, and publications. And last but not least, the introduction of consumer bankruptcy. And we'll have a quick look at each of them in turn. At the time of bankruptcy declaration, the court will decide whether to liquidate on a piecemeal basis or on a going concern basis. So liquidation starts immediately upon the declaration of bankruptcy. In order for the court to decide on a going concern liquidation, there's got to be significant creditor support. And for this going concern liquidation, we have made use of procedures that were in a relatively successful quasi-bankruptcy proceeding that has now been abolished, known as the Special Administration Proceeding, which streamlines the sale of one or more parts, The sale is public sale without a minimum price, but it is subject to approval by a majority of the creditors. For the piecemeal liquidation, assets are sold on the e-auction platform, so it's an automated process. And we have done away with the opportunity of parties to challenge the minimum price, which caused excessive delays because of involvement by courts. We now have automatic adjustment if no eligible offers are received, new auction within 20 days, and the last auction, if none of the previous auctions have been successful, does not have a minimum price. So we expect the liquidation to be completed within less than a year, which is a significant improvement on the several or more years under the previous procedures. And if there are disputes amongst the creditors on ranking, those do not need to hold up liquidation. They can be resolved in parallel or thereafter. The strengthening of the role of creditors is another important element of the new rules. The larger creditor is given particular weight in the appointment of the administrator, while creditors are also entitled to receive reports on the debtor and the progress of the proceeding every semester. More broadly, a significant amount of information is now accessible to creditors, who also have the right to sue management for trading while insolvent. Quite significantly, except for going concern liquidations, declaration of bankruptcy will not impede enforcement by secured creditors, unless they remain inactive for more than 6 months thereafter. And another element is the reduction of privileges of the tax authorities and the social security funds. The new law presents a move towards a more equal treatment amongst the creditors. Digital registry is likely to improve the speed and efficiency of the proceedings. It will also facilitate creditor assembly voting where applicable. And I think one of the elements that we need to emphasize is that it will allow statistics to be compiled so that procedural deficiencies or weaknesses can be identified and improvements can be introduced. Consumer bankruptcy is another important reform, as mentioned, because now consumers have a way to get rid of their debts. Consumer bankruptcy is not a separate proceeding. Bankruptcy proceedings are divided between big and small, depending on the size of the debtor's estate. So I would expect that most consumer bankruptcies would be part of the small bankruptcies. Small bankruptcies are streamlined, and they provide only for piecemeal liquidation as well as for other sort of simplifications to the process. They're entrusted to the justice of the peace courts. Bankrupt individuals, whether consumers or otherwise, are discharged of their debts after 3 years, unless creditors object in cases of fraud or lack of full disclosure or lack of cooperation and convince the court to suspend or delay the discharge. Individuals who contribute significant assets to the estate, more than 100,000 worth, may be discharged in 1 year. And debts discharged are a very broad category. Those not discharged are limited to certain penal sanctions and family maintenance obligations. To summarize, the new bankruptcy framework makes bankruptcy simpler, more transparent, faster, and we think fair. And bankruptcy may be expected to have more substantial contribution to a quick restoration of productive means to potentially productive uses, and to provide creditors with a reasonable recovery, and to offer good faith debtors with a second and third and fourth chance. All of that within the framework and the expectations of the Insolvency Directive of 2019. I apologize that I'm not able to be making this presentation on the webinar in real time, as I'm away on business obligation. But I would be very happy to take any questions you may have and respond to them by email. So please address any questions to me by email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.
Hi to everyone. I'm very glad to be here with you today. I'm Aspasia Maliou, the tax partner of POTAMITISVEKRIS, and taking the lead from George and Stathis, I will try to explain why is the right time to invest in Greece, even through redomiciliation or by establishing a company or a branch here in Greece. Why is the right time for an individual to change its tax residency and become a Greek tax resident? First of all, we have a suspension of tax on capital gains from real estate transfer until the end of December 2022, and we hope that this will last in the future. Moreover, we have an exemption for various income sources, among them dividends, from the special solidarity tax, which was a tax imposed during the crisis with a rate up to 10%. Moreover, after great pressure to this government has accepted and has legislated 3 different preferential time-limited regimes for individuals to become Greek tax residents in force for the attraction from abroad of capital, private wealth, and brain gain. What are these regimes? There are 3 different paths. The first path includes an investment of 500,000 euros and 100,000 euro a flat rate is imposed per annum on worldwide income. It is a lump sum with the privilege of no reveal of specific foreign sources, but with no credit for taxes paid abroad. The second path needs a pension that generates abroad, and a preferential rate of 7% is imposed on every income, not only the income from pension, that derives from any foreign source. Here, tax credit is included for any tax that's paid abroad. The third path is by creating a new job for an employee or a self-employed, and an exemption of 50% of the income tax of this specific source is provided. Why is the perfect time for a company to be established here in Greece or for a branch of a foreign company? Because the corporative income tax has been reduced to a rate of 22% for the tax year 2021 and onwards. Moreover, there is a major decrease of the tax rate for dividends taxation. Now we have a preferential 5%. Tax benefits on EU shareholding structure, that means zero withholding income tax on intergroup payments, dividends, interest, and royalties, and exemption for taxes on capital gains for intergroup transactions. More than that, and apart from the general provision for tax incentives on mergers and acquisition, a new bill on mergers, acquisition, and cooperation between small and medium-sized enterprises is about to be issued. tax incentives in the form of a 30% decrease in corporate income tax for the first 3 years is going to be provided. Moreover, in our income tax code, the family office structure is now included. What is a family office? A family office is a special purpose corporate vehicle for family property management and administration, exclusively on cash flow or estate internal or abroad, movable or immovable, of Greek tax residents and members of their family. Any form of company provided by internal law can be adopted. Member of the company can be either the individual directly or a legal person of its interest. Up to now, there is no defined spectrum of services that can be rendered through this family office, meaning that the family office can provide services from housekeeping to fund management. The services should be rendered directly to individuals, and the administration of the family office can be made by employees or third parties. The transactions between the family office and the family members are VAT exempt, and the tax base on which the income tax rate is imposed is a cost plus allocation of profits method. That means that we have an addition of a percentage of 7%, a markup to total business expenses. What is the condition of having a family office in Greece? The operating costs in Greece of at least 1 million euros on an annual basis and at least 5 employees within the first 12 months of the establishment. Even if an individual doesn't want to establish a company and doesn't want to relocate his tax residency in Greece, he can invest in Greece he can become an angel investor by injecting to a newly established startup company, Greek company, either to the share capital or by purchasing the shareholding right. What is going to gain? He's going to gain an amount equal to 50% of the injection to be deducted from the individual investor and from his taxable income. This possibility has a cap up to 3,100 euros per fiscal year, up to 1,100 euros per company, and up to 3 startups. Moreover, if somebody decides to establish a Greek company or a branch of a foreign company in Greece, he can take advantage for all the expenses for scientific and technological research. What is the scope here? The scope is to increase the GDP percentage from about 1.2% to the average 2% in the EU countries. And what is the method? By providing a tax benefit of the deduction of the expense in the year that is incurring, depreciations included, increased by 100%. What is the condition? The condition is that at the same time, alongside with the tax return, the submission of the support documentation of the expense to the Ministry of Development. The definition of the scientific and technological research is included in the income tax code as the creative work aimed to a systematical increasing of knowledge or the use of knowledge in order to invent new or ameliorate older applications. There are 3 different sectors of research. The basic one original free choice of work, the applied one, original research work for practical objective, and the experimental one, where the goal is to produce new materials or to improve existing ones. An administrative ruling containing restrictive description of the type of the expenses is already in force. Summing up, we think that now it's a right time for everybody to strengthen relations with Greek, either by becoming a Greek tax resident or by investing, doing business in Greece. Having said that, I am at your disposal if you need any questions, to address any questions, or if you need any clarifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Regarding the recent labor law reform, it can be summarized as being law number 4808 of 2021. Although this is a very extensive text, one can find 4 core characteristics, or if you prefer, find the underlying idea of this reform as being the use of modern tools, and most especially digitalization of the Greek labor market, can enhance at the same time the protection of workers' rights, which by definition is the traditional mission of any and all employment law, its real raison d'etre, and enhance work-life balance, which studies show is the #1 priority, not only for millennials and Gen Z, but for an ever-growing number of employees of all generations, especially following our recent collective and individual experience in alternative manners to work and profit due to lockdowns, and at the same time also enhance flexibility of operations and working hours, which is not only one of the most important tools of work-life balance, but also of maximizing production and meeting demand in the most cost-efficient manner. So digitalization, protection of workers' rights, work-life balance, and flexibility of operations and working hours, these are the 4 main characteristics of the recent labor law reform, which are worth exploring a little bit more. Digitalization of the Greek labor market means, first of all, extinction of bureaucracy. 22 different forms are suppressed and replaced by 2 digital ones, which in their turn will soon become extinct once this reform is fully implemented. Digitalization also means enhanced democracy and transparency in the trade union movement. For example, now trade union members have the right to vote from home and thus avoid threats, violence, and intimidation. Digitalization also means employees fully informed of their rights, which is a necessary condition for them being able to exercise those rights, having a right to have effective access of all their professional data stored at the ministry. And digitalization means, above all, the digital employment card, which will record all working hours, whether on or off-site or from a distance. Its development is almost complete. Consultation meeting with trade unions and employees and businesses occurred just last week. It's planned to be tested in banks and supermarket chains starting June of this year, and to be extended to all businesses by the end of this year. Once fully implemented, it will not only facilitate work-life balance, but will also necessarily enhance the protection of employees' rights. The digital card will ensure that every hour it is paid, a long overdue small revolution in itself in a labor market long plagued by recession and with being, for lack of a better word, black. But the recent reform also renders the inspection of employment truly independent from the government, thus implementing one of OECD's most important recommendations and at long last taking politicians out of the labor market. The recent reform also suppresses the discrimination between manual or menial workers and employees, thus correcting a wrong that stained Greek employment law for decades. Perhaps even more importantly, it also ratifies ILO Convention 190 and provides for a variety of measures for a safer and more respectful workplace, where no act of discrimination, harassment, or violence is tolerated. And the recent reform does not ignore traditional health and safety. It ratifies ILO Convention 187, provides for a variety of measures for a safer workplace, and even grants, for the first time in Greek history, health and safety rights, not to workers, but to freelancers in the digital platform world. However, even more central to the recent labor law reform is the promotion of work-life balance. Why? Because anyone wishing to attract and keep the best and the brightest in our time has to take care of this priority. Greece is the first EU member state to ratify the directive on work-life balance for parents and carers, meaning also for people who have close relatives living in their houses that they're taking care of. The new law provides for leaves and flexible working hours for parents and carers, including telework. And it does so irrespective of gender or any other characteristic. And perhaps I'm noting this in order to be able to request any millennials' understanding for my next remark, namely that the recent law also promotes traditional fatherhood, most notably by providing for a paternity leave that took Greece from second to last, from the end to fifth from the top among OECD countries, and by protecting young fathers against termination without cause. In doing so, and in approaching the concept of parent in a genderless manner, it also promotes gender equality. By providing for leaves and protection for both parents instead of for only mothers, it has significantly reduced what, according to studies, was one of the main reasons that employers tended to prefer men. The new law also provides for a safer, harassment-free workplace, which mainly concerns women, and allows for additional income opportunities for those, mainly the young, who have other regular jobs and wish to use freelancing, true freelancing, to increase their income. In doing so, the new law respects at the same time the Yodel decision of the European Court of Justice and the true fact that platform freelancing is beneficial to millions around the world and should not be canceled by narrow-minded over-regulation. But most importantly, although this is the smallest sphere in this slide, it's the most important one in my mind. The new law provides for the right to disconnect. In fact, Greece became only the third country in Europe to proclaim such right, which is not the right to work less or the right to not work from a distance, but is the right to remain uninterrupted by work when off work. The right to have dinner, read a book, chat with a friend, or take a family vacation without having the constant urge, bordering on addiction, to check your cell phone for work-related emails every few minutes. And to overcome such urge, not only because you are disciplined enough to do it and safe enough in your job post to do it, but also because your employer ensures that all such interruptions are minimized. Thus, after protecting workers' rights and allowing for a better work-life balance, the new law employs digitalization to enhance flexibility of operations and working hours, allowing businesses to maximize and fluctuate their production in order to correctly meet demand in the most cost-efficient manner. To this, the recent law creates an individual time bank, able to be extended once the digital card is fully implemented, which allows to compensate time for time, meaning paying for overtime with less work in other periods. It allows for additional overtime reaching OECD best practices. It allows for 24/7 operation, especially in data centers, logistics centers, IT and auxiliary services, which can now work on Sunday and which many businesses are interested in. It institutes garden leave for the first time in Greece. And by fundamentally amending the Greek law on termination, It allows for enhanced performance management and an accurate budgeting of redundancies, as in similar circumstances and contrary to, for example, discrimination, the courts may only award additional severance, but not invalidate the termination and no other reinstatement. In other words, the recent labor law reform approaches the labor market in a modern digital world in order to create a safe and flexible workplace which promotes compliance and work-life balance, providing opportunities especially for families, women, and our young who remain the most hit by unemployment, while at the same time providing businesses with the tools necessary to maximize productivity and thus to attract investment. Pfizer, Microsoft, Philip Morris, Cisco, Lancome are a few of the companies which have trusted Greece and the Greek labor market in recent times, thus leading in the lowest unemployment rate since June 2010, recorded last December of 2021. We still have a long way to go, but all these are grounds for optimism. Initially, when I drafted this presentation, I used the word hope, but then realized that this should be only associated to peace in our times. So all these are simple grounds for optimism, reasons to invest in Greece, and also to come to work in Greece with us. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Alexios, and Aspa for your presentations. I believe it was quite obvious from Alexios' presentation on how the new strategic action plans aim to modernize Greece and make it an pro-investment and modern digitized state at the forefront of developments. I would now open the floor to questions. We have a couple of questions. I mean, I'll take the next one for Alexios. I'll try to publish it. And is it up? Can you see it? I will try to.
Yes, it's there. I can see it.
Okay. So the question, I think it comes from somebody who's really learned on Greek labor laws. So how exactly does the amendment of the law of termination facilitate performance management and more accurate budgeting of redundancies? I believe you mentioned a little bit about that, but I think it's a good point.
Yes, I did. Traditionally, Greek employment law provided that if termination is invalidated for any reason whatsoever, then the underlying contract would continue to be valid. Therefore, the court was obliged to order reinstatement and award all salaries of the interim period from the invalidated termination until such reinstatement. This meant that the court was left with an extremely subjective decision to make, which could have dire consequences for any business. In such subjective cases, it can now only award additional severance, which can be up to double statutory severance, therefore allowing for better budgeting, and therefore also not invalidating terminations due to subjective reasons. That's more or less the answer, as simply as can be put. It's a fundamental change in the Greek law of termination, which was inspired by the employment law of Central Europe. It's something entirely new in Greece, and it may be very interesting to try and see its consequences. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alexios. I see here another question. I guess it's for the cohesion funds from Europe. I hope it's published somehow, or yeah, let me try. Anyway, I will just read the question. Okay, here it is. So the question was to elaborate, the ask was to elaborate on the recovery and resilience, Greek recovery and resilience plan initiatives. So I'll try to be very brief because we're running out of time. And whoever has any questions left, please, send them over by email to the speakers, and we'll be happy to take them. Basically, the rationale of the plan is to use the European funds, and leverage on them and create multipliers to the maximum effect for the Greek economy. So the main point is that the European funds are being given to banks at very low interest rates. The banks are to lend them to the businesses, but they need to combine them with loans from the banks themselves. So the credit rating and credit assessment will come from the banks. Because the interest rates from the EU funds are low, and the EU funds comprise 50% of the investment, the overall borrowing cost, which is the bank funds, which are the other 30% of the investment, come to very low terms, very attractive terms, equal to other Eurozone country terms. So 80% of the investment comes from bank loans and from the European funds. And then there's the requirement for own equity of about 20%. So overall, what happens is that the European funds are essentially doubled as investment funds for the economy, and they're trying to maximize the multiplier effect. There are a lot of initiatives under the resilience plan, which is trying to, it also touches about on higher education strategy, which is a very long strategy and wants to revamp universities and the way universities operate, to train skill and reskill workforce, to digital transformation, to get broadband and for SMEs and the public sector, which are the sectors with the lowest penetration in broadband, and to reform the labor markets, including increasing female participation. So I'm sure in the future that we will see more laws on labor, and elections will be called upon to assist in the drafting of those. There are many other initiatives like green buildings, investing in green energy, and so on and so forth. It's a very big plan. It's a very big it has a very big agenda. It tries to change the Greek economy overall. Since we've run out of time, I would like to thank you all for attending this event. It's been a pleasure and an honor for POTAMITISVEKRIS to prepare this. You can find our contact details on the presentation, and hope we speak soon. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Many thanks for all of our speakers today and their insights, and thanks to our audience as well for your questions. We have had a few other questions today that we haven't managed to get to, but we can follow these up. And if you do have any further questions, as mentioned, please do get in touch with POTAMITISVEKRIS directly using the contact details here on the screen. So it just leaves me to say I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to speak with you again soon. Goodbye.